I'm here to talk about my cycles of my life and what breaking cycles looks like and also creating new ones. My name is Salena Starling. As Scott said, I'm the president and CEO of the community of Big Hearts. And if we move to the next slide, I want to share some photos with you that have never been seen by the public, well, most of them. These are really what I see as embarrassing, but they're key moments in my life. And the first word I want to bring to the stage today is trauma. Because trauma is in every single person's life. Here, in the walks of life of every person you'll meet, have met. Trauma was my first breath, my first heartbeat. That's when trauma was in my life. And I want to share some moments of my life from the beginning. I share a lot. I'm very open to the world. I don't hold anything back, and that's something I love about myself. The story I want to share with you today is one that I had when I was about 3 or 4. And it was a day in my life, a day in an Indigenous youth life here in urban Winnipeg. When I was around 3 or 4, I remember being with my older sister. Here would probably be about this age. And we were living in this really tiny apartment in central Winnipeg on Lakeside. And there were many times where we didn't have food, we didn't have water, we didn't have internet. We had absolutely nothing to survive. I was 3, maybe 4 years old. My mother, who was an addict and an alcoholic. My father, who was abusive and barely ever at home. That was the life we lived in. And I remember these days, our daily life, where my mother would be passed out on the couch because she did way too many drugs. And we have to figure out how we're going to be fed for the next week, what we're going to eat, how we're going to eat. And when we had nothing left, my sister opened up all the mushroom soup cans and we ate out with the spoons and we just ate that mushy food. When all of that was gone, we had to knock on our neighbors' doors. They had to knock on their doors and say, please, can I have something to eat? I haven't eaten in days. They would give us butter. They would give us their scraps. They would give us whatever they can. And when they ran out of food to give, we had to walk down the streets of Lakeside and North End and ask local restaurants, can I please have some food? And then when my mother got back up again, went shopping, bought us food, that cycle happened over and over again, where we'd get to know our mom. She would be happy. We'd go shopping. But the money she got, it wasn't because she had a job. It was because she sold herself for sex. That was my mother's life. She'd sell herself for sex, use that money to buy food, and all the rest would go to drugs and alcohol. And that was the beginning of my life. That was the beginning of my story. And it's so similar to so many other Indigenous youth stories all across Winnipeg. And I share these stories not to make you upset, but to make you understand that my story is in no way unique for an Indigenous youth here in Winnipeg. Because this little girl, this one and this one, she was fighting for her life. She didn't know how to survive, but she tried. That's what she did. She ate whatever she could. And that was the first cycle of her life, was understanding the traumas that were embedded in her. Because the traumas didn't just happen through the stories I told you. She was born with them. My mother, she was a product of the Millennium Suit. She was taken in the child welfare system when she was very young. My grandmother, she was a victim of the day schools, residential schools, and the 60s scoop. So we already have 3 generations of child welfare system embedded in every single one of us. And if we move on to the next slide, disconnection. Disconnection is what I felt when I entered the foster care system. This was me, 6 or 7 years old, feeling like I didn't know anyone. I didn't know my family. I didn't know my people. Who am I as an Indigenous person? I hated every single part of who I was. Every single part of my being I resented, from my skin color, to my hair, to my nose, everything that made me, Salena Starling, I hated. And that started because I had no one. I didn't understand who I was. I was disconnected right from birth. Many people ask to this day, do you know your culture? Do you know your language? Do you know your people? No. No, I don't. My grandmother didn't. My mother didn't. I don't. And so that disconnection started with my grandma. Didn't start with me. And so I am 3 generations of disconnect. We move on to the next slide. Understanding and resilience. I might have been disconnected with every single part of my life, but I was connected to my own stories. When I started public speaking, this is actually the first time I was ever on stage. In that moment there. And I started public speaking, sharing my story. And I shared my story from a part of people needing to hear my hurt. I wanted people to feel what I felt. I wanted them to know what it was like for me every single day of my life. Not for them to have this understanding that this is what Indigenous youth go through, but I wanted them to hurt because I hurt so bad. But what's funny is when they actually began to understand, I've understood myself. Through their understanding of Indigenous youth to go through this, I understood that people could understand. So it was this unique little twist there. Public speaking was truly my savior. It helped me in every aspect of life. I said this quote before, now I can't get it out of my head, but I took my stories and I pulled them apart, every part of my life. And I was able to find my voice. I was able to find who I was through my storytelling. And my resiliency is my stories, is my storytelling. And I began to understand myself even more. Every story that I took and I tore apart, I began to understand myself more. Because every story that I share, every story that I tell, it's merely one part of me. But they all make up the whole story of Salena. And so through this new cycle of learning to public speak, I began to understand myself as an Indigenous person, an Indigenous woman, and what change truly looks like. Because I didn't understand the power of storytelling. And if we move on to the last slide here, I began to create my new cycle. And that was through storytelling, the impacts of my voice. This cycle I created, and I didn't understand why, but it connected me with every single person I met. And I hope today I connected with each and every one of you in this room through one part of my story. And how reconciliation ties into all of this is that I didn't understand reconciliation. I thought because I was Indigenous, I didn't have any part in this truth and reconciliation talk. I thought I was excluded. But once I started public speaking, understanding my own story, truth and reconciliation became the heart of all of it. Because through my own education, through my own understanding, and through my own storytelling, that is where reconciliation started for me. And so I urge all of you to understand your own stories, to know your voice, to realize that storytelling can truly save your life and many others. I created my own new cycle of life through the power of storytelling, and I hope you can too. Thank you so much.